happening. Anthea, conservative Christians and the religious right have always been a political force, or at least for the last several decades. But this is different. What is Christian nationalism?
Christian nationalism is the belief that America is a Christian nation. It was made to be a Christian nation. That church and state separation that Jefferson talked about in the Danbury letter is not applicable. Basically, they want church and state to be together. The other part of this is that they look at what the founders and framers did and said, oh no, this is a Christian nation. So therefore, if you say this like General Flynn said it, when he had this famous thing when everybody got upset with him, he basically said, you know, America is in the Bible. And I'm like thinking, I went to seminary. I don't know where America is in the Bible, but please enlighten me. And he said this, and that this America had a special place in biblical history and biblical prophecy. And so for lots of people, the way that they think about Christian nationalism is that this is a God-ordained country, God has blessed us in a certain way, and that Christianity should be the law of the land, and that we should all be following Christian rules. Christ should be at the center of everything, and Christian nationalism means that the foundations of the government are about Christianity and not about freedom of religion.
Peter, you are a conservative Christian. How would you describe this movement?
Malicious and dangerous. I think Professor Butler's description was accurate and ominous. I think it's a threat to American democracy, but I think it's also a threat to the Christian faith. I think it's a desecration of the Christian faith, and I think at the core identity for a lot of these people who are Christian nationalists is actually not faith. It's a whole series of other things: political, partisan, cultural, psychological identities, and they've engrafted Christian faith, or their version of Christian faith, into to support, to validate these pre-existing views. It's important to say that not all Christians or evangelicals are Christian nationalists. It's a loose term, but in terms of how Professor Butler described it, that movement exists. It's growing. And a movement doesn't have to be extremely large to be dangerous to the civic and political health of the country.
Catherine, a lot of people may think this is just about abortion or prayer in schools, but it is a lot more than that. How did it become so powerful?
The Christian nationalist movement is as powerful and strong as it is because it has invested for over 50 years in a number of organizations which not only promote the Christian nationalist message and ideology, but also build political power. And these organizations are often interconnected. There are policy groups, think tanks, legal advocacy groups, others that focus on legislation or data or networking. They often draw clergy into networks and give them messaging tools to turn out their congregants to vote for far-right candidates. And the thing to keep in mind is that the movement is radically anti-democratic at all levels. It rejects our founding principles and the principles of equality and pluralism that represent the best of the American promise.
Peter, what is it that people see in American culture today that they're so vehemently opposed to?
Great question.
In terms of the Christian nationalists?
Yes.
Yeah. It's a really good question.
Pluralism.
I think there's some pretext.
They don't like the plurality,
there's a fear that
the integration.
And a woke ideology is going to destroy the country, the beliefs and values that they care about. But the reality, Stephanie, is that the objective conditions of
you
the country
cannot destroy the church.
Good, certainly as good or better under Joe Biden and under Donald Trump. I think what's happening is, in some respects, fear is a justification as much as it is a cause for people on the right, the Christian nationalist movement. They are so wedded, so twinned to this ideology, and it's an ideology of aggression and a militancy, and it's unforgiving in its nature. There's a brutishness and brutality to it. That itself, I think, is probably tied. It's a complicated question, but I think it's tied to feelings of dishonor and disrespect. And also a fear of losing power, including a lot of white evangelicals losing power as America becomes more diverse. So it's a concoction of different emotions, but whatever they are, they're together, aggregated it's a malignant movement.
So what I hear, Anthea, is this fear or anger about losing white power.
Yes.
There are all sorts of Christians in the United States of America. Who is attracted to this form of Christianity?
You know, I want to start off by a line from my book where I talk about the promise of whiteness. And the promise of whiteness is about having authority and power, and specifically white male power. And so one of the reasons why I think people are attracted to this, whether they be white Christians or non-white Christians, is because it's a sense that they can have a proximity to power. That's the first thing. The second thing is nostalgia. Let's hope that we can go back to the times they were, like the 1950s or something, when it's
Make America great again.
Exactly. Or Americanism, as it was called in the 1950s, or back when it's 2008 election, it was going to be America, it's been America first. There's been all of these kinds of things, right? So I think one of the things that we have to really consider is that these are people who don't want immigrants. They don't want any difference. They want a homogenized America. And homogeneity means being white Christian. And I think that's
If
something
you
that
and I
is
didn't have these big education and career opportunities, well
Yes.
then,
Yeah.
we would be home raising those children.
Exactly. It would be just like what happened with the RNC rebuttal to President Biden. We would be in our kitchens. We would be nice trad wives. We would not speak up when we were spoken to unless it was our husband speaking to us. So these are the kinds of things I think people really are attracted to and want. And so I think, you know, when we start to talk about the appeals that the Republican Party, and specifically President Trump, is making, he's making an appeal that I'm going to protect women. I'm going to help women. I am going to be the one to do that. And at the same time, taking away all of their reproductive rights. And that just doesn't seem fair.
Catherine, is there something about this political movement that we are in, this political moment that we are in right now that's drawing so many people into it?
Well, I think that, we have to, we can't understand what's happening in our political moment now without really understanding this movement and how it works. So, for example, this movement is up to its eyeballs in January 6th, and the leaders were promoting the whole election fraud coup attempt. And unfortunately, this is a movement that's really seized control of the Republican Party. Democracy really needs gatekeepers, and it needs leaders in all parties who are willing to stand for principle and defend institutions of value that have served us over time. And unfortunately, the leadership of the Republican Party has demonstrated a degree of cowardice in the face of these extremists and a sort of cravenness in their own quest for power. So the crisis we're facing today is really a crisis of American democracy, and I believe specifically a crisis of the Republican Party. Now, of course, there are many good people who identify as Republican, but unfortunately, they have not reined in the extremes of their party. And the idea that a leader is going to come on and come around and rein in those extremes now is kind of wishful thinking. This, Trump is the leader of the Republican Party, and the entire Republican Party has sort of caved to the MAGA movement and the Christian nationalist movement.
Peter, what do they want? What's the end goal?
Power. I think it's power, but it's a particular kind of power, and it's almost a Nietzschean will to power. Ends justify the means. They want power both to advance certain things that they believe in and to care about. But I actually think that they also want power to inflict real harm on the people that they disagree with. This is, I think, the appeal of Trump saying that I am your vengeance, I am your retribution. That has a lot of resonance with these people. I just want to say one thing as a person of the Christian faith, that Christianity is, if anything, a religion of anti-power, and Jesus himself is probably as contrary to a Christian nationalist as you could get, because his was really his universal message. But the whole Sermon on the Mount is, in a sense, anti-power. Blessed are the poor and the weak. The last shall be first. So it's important to understand the extraordinary inversion, moral inversion, theological inversion that's taking place here.
I
that
like
you could
that.
somehow
The
contort
inversion
Christianity and the message of Jesus to advance what
of
these people are
Jesus'
advancing.
message. Wow.
Pretty sure they're not into worshiping false idols. We're going to talk about that when we come back. As we return, Christian nationalists are hailing Trump as their savior. We're going to take a closer look at the hold he has on them when the 11th hour continues.
To shame Christians, they try and shame us. I'm a very proud Christian, actually. We're taking the bullets, taking the arrows. I'm taking them for you, and I'm so honored to take them. You have no idea. November 5th is going to be called something else. You know what it's going to be called? Christian Visibility Day, when Christians turn out in numbers that nobody has ever seen before.
For many Christian nationalists, Donald J. Trump is the leader they have been looking for. They believe if he becomes president, they can make their vision of what America should be a reality. And there is something he is more than willing to encourage at his rallies on the campaign trail. Anthea, Peter, Catherine still with us. Anthea, have we ever had a political candidate like Trump? I mean, there are some Christian voters who see him as their savior.
No, we have not had anybody see a presidential candidate as savior. And for evangelicals, this is where I, am personally appalled, because for evangelicals, there is only one savior, and that's Jesus Christ. But the way they think about Trump is that he is a divine figure. In the first round of his presidency, they compared him to King Cyrus. There's all this artwork of Jesus standing behind him in the Oval Office. There were all these memes that happened in the first round. But what has happened now since 2020, and he lost, is that now he's taking up sort of tying himself into a persecution complex. Look, they are doing this to me. I am your savior. I'm the one to do this. So it was no mistake that he started to sell the Bible on Holy Week, right? And last year he did the same thing. He talked about how they are trying to persecute him. So this narrative of persecution is tying into evangelical beliefs about their own persecution, or what they perceive to be persecution. And he's the perfect person for them. So in other words, it doesn't matter if he's had 3 wives. It doesn't matter about any of that stuff we thought would matter to evangelicals. What matters to them is that they see him as a suffering savior, but a suffering savior for their causes and for them.
Peter, back in 2016, Trump told some of his supporters that they were under siege. He said that Christianity will have power again. Religious extremism has been part of his rap for years, but now it is different. What do you hear him telling supporters today?
Well, I just think that he's ratcheted up, and the language that he's using is more violent and more threatening. There's a psychological accommodation that's happened. There was some resistance, not much, not obviously nearly as much as there should have been when Trump came onto the scene. But with every transgression that he made, Christian nationalists and a lot of Christians who are not nationalists, but just evangelical Christians, made their inner peace with Donald Trump, and he changed them much more than they changed him. And I want to say one other thing, which I think is important to understand in this context. Kristen Dumais is a historian at Calvin University, and she wrote a very good book called Jesus and John Wayne. And one of her arguments is that Donald Trump is the personification of a lot of values that the white evangelical movement had for decades and decades. A lot of people who don't follow the movement think, and understandably so, isn't there this massive hypocrisy on Trump with his depraved life, moral life, personal life? How could they like him? Again, that's true, but that's not the full story. It's the cruelty that he embodies that, unfortunately, tragically, shamefully resonates with them. So there's something about him, and we saw this in the primaries in 2016. We see it again this year in the primaries. When Republicans have choices, conservative alternatives to Donald Trump, non-corrupt alternatives to Donald Trump, successful governors like Nikki Haley, they reject her, they reject them in overwhelming numbers. That means there's something about Trump that draws him to them, which is a real shame.
Catherine, you wrote that right-wing conspiracy theories have never been more bloodthirsty. We talked about it in the last segment. We have seen political violence become a reality. January 6th was clearly that. I want to understand if and how Christian nationalism played a role in January 6th, and do you think there'll be more violence ahead?
Well, The movement leaders absolutely played a role in January 6th. They spread election lies in the run-up to January 6th. This Conservative Action Project, an organization affiliated with the Council for National Policy, issued a memo telling this is one of the key networking organizations of the religious right, telling leaders that they should and their allied political allies that the electoral vote should be contested. So, and not only that, there were a number of Christian nationalist leaders who actually participated in the Jericho marches that preceded the January 6th coup attempt. So, you mentioned conspiracism and disinformation. This is unfortunately a really big part of the movement. The movement leaders know very well if you can separate people from the facts, you can control them, you can control their behavior, and you can control their vote. So a lot of the folks who participated in January 6th, a lot of the folks who attend these other sort of conspiracy fests like Reawaken America tours, I don't know if you know about that. There's these sort of traveling pro-Trump conspiracy roadshows that take places in megachurches and attract thousands of attendees. They just sort of spread lies, all different kinds of lies. There's a lot of QAnon, there's a lot of great replacement and other conspiracies. But the main lie that they're spreading is the idea that Donald Trump is their savior. He's a really terrific guy. The election of 2020 was stolen. And unfortunately, they're really priming a section of the American public to become sort of authoritarian voters.
They are deeply entangled in Trump's 2024 campaign. And Thea, what could another Trump administration look like with some of these guys at the helm?
Well, it could look really bad because basically what you have now is called Project 2025, which is a piece that's been put together by the Heritage Foundation, where they talk about how they will turn
900 manifesto,
yes,
really,
basically, where they are going to change all these different roles of places in government, how they're going to put their own people in, what kind of rules will change because of this. They are already interviewing people. And I think that for people who just look, oh, this is just another project, they have had time to think about what they've wanted to do since 2020. And this Project 2025, I think, is the most fearful thing. The other thing I would say is that, you heard Donald Trump yesterday say, well, I'm not really going to be involved in abortion. I'm going to kick this back to the states, right? That's an obfuscation. He's the reason why decisions are being made in these states. Exactly. But he's doing a nice little feint so that people won't see this and that he can get women's votes. But the way that I would put it is the way a friend said it to me. It's like if women vote for Donald Trump, it's like chickens voting for Colonel Sanders. And that's crazy to say, but it's just the truth. And I think that, these kinds of projects, whether they're on the state level or the national level, we can look at book banning, we could look at how you can't teach ethnicity in certain places in schools where people have to actually get permission for their kids to learn about African American history during Black History Month, okay? Because that's woke in Florida. All right. So these kinds of things are going to be entrenched because they want a theocracy. And this is the thing that I can't stress to people enough, that you need to understand that it's not just about abortion. It's not just about, all of these other little bitty things like books and all of this. This is about changing the entire structure. And for people who say they believe in freedom, they don't believe in everybody else's freedom. They want freedom for themselves, but they don't want it for the rest of us who are living in this nation and don't want to live by those rules because we may or may not believe them.
Christian nationalism, if you don't know what it is, educate yourself. It is growing more prominent, more powerful, and it is deeply entangled in Donald Trump's campaign. And Thea, Peter, Catherine, thank you all for educating us tonight. And on that very serious and somber note, I wish you a very, very good night. From all